Okay, welcome to another episode of the Scratch Advisors YouTube channel. Um, Today I have with me Samantha Byrd, who is the Chief People Officer of Technosylva. Samantha, thank you for being here.
Hi, Myers. Great to be here.
So just to set a little context, if someone's like watching this for the first time, my name is Myers Dupuy. I am a consultant with my own agency called Scratch Advisors, and we help fast growing SMBs organize their company, uh, getting rid of a lot of SaaS tools, like an overabundance of SaaS tools that you don't need, and building a no code platform in Notion to align the executive team's vision for the strategic objectives with the operational reality on the ground of trying to get your job done. And I have been working with Technosylva for the past 2 years, actually.
I know, it's amazing.
Yeah, doing this together. And Samantha has been an amazing collaborative partner with me, building out some really innovative solutions in the HR space that we're going to talk about today. Um, which, let me just say what it is: global HR global onboarding. Technosylva has employees all across the world and is growing very rapidly. And so we were encountering some pretty serious challenges in how to organize onboarding in a way that was efficient and inspirational and got people up to speed quickly. And so that's the problem that Samantha and I set out to solve. And we're going to go through that today. But before we get into that, Samantha, I just want to get a little bit about you and your background. So just kind of tell us where you live, what's going on in your life, and we'll talk about you a little bit.
Okay, great. But do you remember that we started the conversation about onboarding on the first day we met?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Your very first day on the job.
My first day at Technosylva, and we met in a boardroom in Boston, and it was one of the first things we talked about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
I
And here
can't
we
believe it's
are.
been 2 years since then.
Uh, Great. So, Myers, thanks again for having me on. I love talking about this. I love talking about all things HR and making companies great. So I live outside of the Washington, D.C. area. I've been doing human resources now for, as I was reminded, more than 20 years, which makes me feel really old. And I don't know where the time went. Um, but I really, I love this work. And, there are parts of it certainly that I don't love all the time. But I've had a really sort of interesting and varied career that I don't think I would change for anything, because I've had an opportunity to work with really smart and talented people and build some amazing organizations. So, what else could you want in a day's work?
Yeah. So I was looking back at your LinkedIn profile, and yeah, it has been over 20 years of like, I mean, you have a classic career trajectory of like assistant HR, all the way up to the last 3 or 4 companies being the chief people officer. So I just like to reflect a little bit back into your career history um, in that specific role and just ask you from when you started, what's different about it? What's changed in that role? Are there things that are easier now versus harder now, and what hasn't changed? Just let's just kind of get nerdy on the chief people officer career track for a second.
Yeah, so I think even in the time that I've done it, there's been a shift in, I don't know, you call it a realization or an understanding of the role that a chief people officer or that an HR function could play in a business. And so, at the beginning, I spent a lot of time filing paperwork, and putting things. It was still like very analog, very manual, and there was still a lot of HR that was about pushing paper and about tracking things, and all of that is still there, but we've have some technological innovations that just make that stuff happen. And so we sort of put all that manual administrative work to the side, and we get to the place where HR can actually provide a lot more value in businesses when we're thinking about what talent should look like, how to organize your company, how to build teams, and really how to be a partner to your executive leadership team and helping them build and grow this great business, and taking these strategic objectives, putting them into actions, and seeing what comes out at the end of the day. So a lot of the function is still there. It's like I do a lot of the same stuff I was doing 20 years ago, but I do it in a different way. And then I think as I've grown in this function, and as I've seen a lot of different industries and a lot of different types of companies, like I've been able to change how I present HR in an organization, and what works and what doesn't. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It sounds like there is a philosophical / expectations shift from an HR person being kind of like the accountant around people, like have they got their payroll set up, or the kind of the administrative stuff, to a recognition by companies that people are one of, if not the most valuable intellectual property asset the company has, and that HR is responsible for like making sure that is a healthy asset.
Yeah, I often had this joke when I just exited one company and I was out interviewing for another, and working with a couple of firms on that. And every first interview I went with, there must have been like a presentation at some PE event somewhere saying how important the chief people officer now is in private equity. Like they're like 10 years ago, it was the CFO and the rationalization of that. And now we've come to this part where it's the people. And so you started to feel that. You started to feel that in the leaders that were coming into these businesses and how they wanted to partner and leverage the people opportunities in the business. So there definitely has been an environmental change there, and the recognition of, most companies spend more money on people than on anything else. We all look at the fancy computers we have or the big office buildings, and it doesn't even scratch the surface of the investment that we make bringing people in the door and trying to get them productive. And so I think it's just a real understanding of, if you have somebody who can help you leverage that, then that's going to, have great returns for your business.
So if you go back a little bit further than your HR career of 20 years, I saw that you were the rowing coach at George Washington University.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
It was really cool. I grew up as a swimmer. I rowed in college and then rowed for a long time after college, and had an opportunity to coach. And to this day, is the most rewarding job that I've ever had. And one day I hope to go back to it. Maybe like in retirement, I can go back and be a philosophical coach on that. Rowing meant a lot to me, and I think was very impactful on sort of shaping my life and the way I think about things. And so part of me wanted to be able to impart that on other people and have other people find the same joy that I had in that sport. The other thing is I just like the sport, and I like the idea of the quest for I won't even call it perfection, but the quest for getting better at something every day, doing the incremental work, the not fun work of just showing up and, putting the blade in the water, taking it out of the water, and getting a little bit better at that every time you did it. And I loved it. And that probably says a lot about me, but I loved how, just the regularity and the expectations and the clear expectations of what was required of you. So amazing that I had an opportunity to coach. It was also I was coaching novice women at GW on September 11th of 2001. And we had just finished practice when that happened. And living in Washington, D.C., the city shut down. There was no phone service. There was no cell phone service. And suddenly I had 77 girls at that time on my team who were away from home for the first time. And so talk about some team building activities like on that front, and building through that, and then like managing and building off the top of that. It was so really interesting with what was going on around us, and then also interesting in what was going on in the sport and just in our daily lives.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was hanging out with my kids recently. I've got a 14-year-old and a 10-year-old, and in the same way that like the Spanish American War doesn't mean a whole lot to our hearts and minds just hearing it
Yeah,
as a historical event. 9/11 doesn't mean much to them.
yeah,
And we just happened to trip over a Netflix documentary about 9/11, and my son said, "Oh, let's just watch this." And at first, I was like, "I don't know if I want to watch that. That I don't
yeah,
know. I don't know like what agenda that movie producer had. Who knows? Whatever."
yeah,
But Netflix momentum happened, and we watched the 9/11 documentary, and it blew me away. Like how I don't know, just I'd forgotten how deeply emotional that day was, and my kids were blown away at what actually happened. And when you saw the footage, like the whole point of this documentary was it was like street level footage that people recorded with their phones and from
yeah,
balconies and so forth from different points of view. And yeah, this is crazy just to
yeah.
remember it and see it with your kids where they're like, wow, that actually happened. And yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, but sorry, I can't think about coaching without thinking about that, because it was like it was
Hmm.
such a big part of what happened and like what that team went through. So, um, and
Yeah.
it was just where we lived, where we happened to live. So, but yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah. Okay. Before we transition over to the main topic of this conversation, let's just wrap up your section with. So you've been doing this job for a long time. You're obviously very accomplished at it. Um, and imagine you were sitting with a recent college grad who just says, I really want to be a chief people officer someday. What advice would you give them to prepare for that?
Yeah. So I would start by saying that there's like not one degree that you can study in college that prepares you for this role, but there are a lot of degrees that you can bring to bear on this role. So you don't have to major in human resources or organizational development or industrial psychology. You can come at this from a lot of different ways. And in thinking about this, I'm reminded of being a young HR professional and sitting with who was one of my mentors at that time. Um, and he told me this advice, and I don't think I really understood it until maybe 5 years ago, which is crazy to think about that. But it was somewhere like kicking around in there, and I understood it. But he said, in order to be really good at HR, you have to understand the business. You have to understand how the business makes money, what levers you can pull, how you can change and pivot, how it's going to grow, what's the strategy. Whereas, at that point in my career, I was like, well, I'm just going to come in and I'm going to set up this benefit plan and I'm going to recruit these people. I'm going to do this. And, we bring the same sort of functional, like HR functional stuff to any company, but you have to like do it in a different way. There's not one solution, because I couldn't take something that I did for a company, 3 companies ago and bring it to Technosylva. It wouldn't have worked. Like it just, I'm gonna write the exact same performance review process. Well, that didn't take into any account what's going on at Technosylva, how this company is growing globally, the specific industry that we work in. And so, if I had to boil that down into one sentence, it's like be a student of whatever industry you're in. Understand how that industry works, understand how that company is going to be successful, and then align your people strategies around that.
That's a great answer. And it connects back to what you said earlier about what has changed in the role, is that HR can be seen as a strategic partner to the company and not just an administrator and filer of papers about people. And when you said that answer about, the kind of the transformation of the value expectation of HR, what popped in my head was sort of a skeptical counterpoint to that, which is HR has to earn it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you had an HR person that showed up and said, well, take me seriously as a part of the executive team, and I want to be in those strategic conversations, and I want to produce that kind of value for this company. What you just said about learning what that company needs in its industry, what its growth goals are, how it makes money, that's what you have to do in order to earn that seat at the table.
Yeah. Like, learn to read a P&L, understand the data, like be able to bring data that supports what you're trying to achieve to the table. Don't just say, hey, I think it's a great idea if we do this. Like, no other executive gets to come and say, hey, I think it's a great idea. Marketing doesn't do that. Product doesn't do it. Engineering doesn't do it. So you shouldn't expect to get that right either.
Yeah. And if HR is going to get a stereotypical sort of presumptuous accusation made at it, it's that it's warm and fuzzy, just trying to make people happy, and people don't want to work too much, and so HR is going to protect the people. Like that's not. Yeah. So you have to overcome that, and I think what you're describing as start off with the mindset that you are a peer executive, understanding the business model and the growth goals, and then HR is inside of that. That's great.
Yeah. Have an opinion. I often, I'm sort of the joke, because if we'll do a DISC profile or a predictive index profile or any of them, your stereotypical, on the DISC profile, your stereotypical HR person, or what everybody thinks the HR person should be, is the S. And I am like directly across and off the chart from the S. And so, to where, like, if you put it up blankly, they're like, where's our HR person? There's no where are they? Who's going to take care of the people? But my vision of that is, by knowing and understanding the business and being able to put plans in place, I do a better job of like taking care of the people than being the people person and the cruise ship activity director.
Huh. Okay. You also said a very practical piece of advice that I think is worth sharing here. And I have a correlated piece of advice as well. So what did you share about video recordings, Zoom recordings?
Yeah, so Zoom or Meet or whatever the platform is, turn off the like automated reactions to like the balloons that pop up or the fireworks that go off, because they're going to go off at the wrong time. So that's really like, that's my 101 advice for the day.
You're going to be in a termination conversation and fireworks and balloons are going to go off. Yeah.
Not a good look.
So my connected piece of advice to that, which I tell people, is when you're sending an email, don't put the person's email address, like even if you hit reply, delete it out. Especially if it's an emotionally validating email for yourself, where you're kind of like trying to make a point and feeling really good about what you're saying, which means you probably shouldn't send it. But like, I have sent the wrong emails simply because I accidentally hit the keyboard shortcut to send the email, and it went, and it shouldn't have gone. And if you take the person's name out, you can't make that mistake.
That is really good advice, because I do that as well. And I do find that it's harder now that I'm switching back and forth between Slack and email a lot, because hitting return in Slack sends something where it doesn't in email. And so I catch myself all the time.
Yeah, I get that. So you get that kind of like woozy feeling when you hit enter in an email. You're like, oh my God, did it send? Oh no, it didn't send.
It didn't send. Perfect.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about Technosylva. Could you just say what Technosylva is excellent at, and what is its footprint? Like, what is its kind of global footprint and growth expectations?
Yeah, so Technosylva is a business that was started about 30 years ago, headquartered in Leon, Spain, and we are a SaaS software platform that we focus on wildfire prediction, mitigation, and risk management. And then we also have some products that actually help you with situational awareness if you are in a wildfire event. So again, company started in Leon. We have an office here in the United States as well, in San Diego, and but in the U.S. we're fully remote. So we have an office that's kind of a storage closet for marketing materials and a conference room. And then in Leon we have an office. We're about 160 employees today. Over the last year and a half, we've done several acquisitions to expand our scope out of wildfire into flood modeling as well. So we now have teammates in more places in the U.S., also in Germany. So today's footprint, we look like 185 employees, U.S., Canada, Germany, and Spain.
Someone's in Brazil too, aren't they? Najat?
Yeah, we do have a consultant who lives there, and like one person in the UK. So
Okay.
yeah.
Cool. Also, I think it's worth noting that, if you think about the big media coverage of wildfires that we've recently been aware of, like in California, you can find videos of the governor of California speaking at a committee, a Senate committee hearing, saying like, we're so grateful we have Technosylva. I've seen executives of like Cal Fire, the largest agency and that manages wildfires, talking about Technosylva. So Technosylva has an amazing mission, is doing some great work in the world.
Yeah, I mean, really simply, mission is we exist to reduce the impact of wildfires and extreme weather. We work with the largest investor-owned utilities in the United States. We work with fire agencies, Cal Fire as well, and then also, those similar types of organizations globally. I couldn't be more proud of the work that I get to do here, and the work that our team gets to do. I think that, again, very mission oriented. And it's, one, we're good at it. Two, we're, founded on some of the best science and research on fire modeling that exists in the world. So not bad to have like the world's authority on wildfire be the founder of your organization. And we have similar as we move into the flood space as well. Two of the most well-known flood modelers in the world are now part of our organization. So really strong focus on science, and a really strong mandate on making a difference in the world.
Yeah. Okay, great. Let's talk about, when you first started, Technosylva had recently taken on investment from a private equity firm. There was then, and there is even more now, expectation of exponential growth, both from a macroeconomic standpoint, but Technosylva was a very lean company 2 years ago. Like, I think you were at 60 people. I feel a we with Technosylva.
Yeah, no, you should. You were here.
Yeah. So yeah, it's like tripled in size in the last 2 years, and it's probably got another growth factor ahead of it. So let's talk about onboarding, because that is actually the problem that we really put our heads together to solve. And if you could just talk about what it was like when you first started 2 years ago, what was good about it, what was problematic about it, and what did you and I set out to solve, and then we'll actually go over and take a look at it.
Yeah. So I would say that there wasn't one onboarding philosophy. There wasn't one onboarding strategy in the organization. If you lived in Spain, your onboarding and the information you got was very different than if you lived in the United States. And I would say that it was very transactional. So, it was the only part of onboarding we were doing okay, and that wasn't actually even that great, was making sure that we got you in the payroll system so that we could pay you, and that we got you signed up for benefits. And that was sort of it. And then as you thought about the training you needed to do to get good at your job, you had to go talk to someone, and we were very person dependent. This is not unusual and at all in a small company that a few people hold all of the information, and
It's
it
not
does.
only not unusual, it's inevitable.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's just whether you can like pull yourself out of it or not.
right. It's like, oh, well, hey, I need to go learn about X. Well, you got to go talk to David. I also need to learn about Y. That's David again. And you need to
Yeah.
talk about like, so we were putting a burden on already really busy employees by having them have to be the single point of contact. And as we were thinking about this growth, that wasn't going to be sustainable because they were going to have to quit their day job in order to just onboard employees.
Yeah.
So, when I entered and started thinking about it, I wanted there to be, um, and I will say, I think it is important to note that because we had just taken an investment from TA, this company was going through a transition of being a founder-led, bootstrapped organization to now a company managed by executives, with all the bells and whistles that come with that. So we're sort of managing both of these things in tandem as we think about it. And the first conversations that we had, and really was day one, we wanted everybody to have the same experience. We wanted everybody to have the same access to information. And we wanted people to be able to self-serve. So what we were reading, Come Up for Air, is that the book we read at that time, talking
Mm-hmm.
about being able to go and self-serve, and get information rather than push information.
Mm-hmm.
So, and not that we wanted to take people out of the onboarding process, but we wanted to document things, and we wanted to give people options on how they learn and how they get to where they need to be.
Yeah. And, to your point about the original onboarding was really just a function of begging and borrowing time to talk to people that were too busy to talk to you.
Yeah.
Like it was the burden of onboarding was almost 100% dependent on those people. And
Mm-hmm.
so now we're talking about shifting to a solution that is self-service and independent. But as we're going to show here, we actually there are some critical conversations that we want employees to have at different stages of onboarding, and those are called out.
Yeah.
Those are grouped by, there are certain conversations that new people just need to have with you, Samantha. And so when they get their onboarding project, it's like, oh, these are the 3 things I need to talk to Samantha about. So when you finally do get time with them, they show up informed, prepared, and everything y'all need to talk about is contained together. So it's not removing those in-person conversations. It's just narrowing them down to just the ones that are really important.
Right. And that there were better ways to get other information. So so yeah, I don't know. Did you want to jump in and show a demo
Yeah,
now of what
at
we're
that
looking at?
time, I was the acting manager of the product department, and we had 2 employees in product.
Mhm.
Those employees, of course, were still responsible for the complex deliveries and so forth. And the delivery team was the team that needed to grow the most. And
Mhm.
I think a really good indicator of the pain that we were experiencing as a company is that those 2 product employees desperately needed delivery people to be hired.
Mhm.
But every time a new delivery person was hired, they were just cringing at the amount of work they were going to have to do to manually bring that new delivery person up to speed. And so
Yeah.
it's like you can't live with it. You can't live without the new people, and you can't live with the new people. And the visceral like pain that they would experience of like, oh gosh, I've got a new person starting this week. Like
Mhm.
my, so yeah.
It would be really interesting to go have a conversation with them today. I haven't talked to them about this particular topic in quite a while, but totally different organization when you think
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Okay, cool. So yeah, that was the problem. And we had a rapid pace of new people coming on. And so we decided to build a new system to attack those problems. And just for some extra context, um, we chose to adopt Notion as a no code platform in Technosylva. This is one of the things that Scratch Advisors, my company, does fairly regularly.
Mhm.
Is that, I'm just going to share a picture real quick because I think it does a good job of explaining this problem. It's very common for companies these days to have like a couple of anchor applications, like a HubSpot and maybe a Jira, and then in between is the messy middle of disorganized chaos. And so all the information that the employee arguably needs to find and consume is in Slack messages, emails, 10 different duplicate spreadsheets that only certain people know where they are and why you would go to that spreadsheet, right? And so at a holistic level, and kind of like a philosophical management level, this is the problem that this is the dragon we've been trying to slay for 2 years, and making great incremental progress, this onboarding solution being one example. But this problem is kind of the genesis of, hey, instead of us buying 15, 20, 30 different SaaS tools to like solve these individual problems and in individual departments, let's actually architect for ourselves a Technosylva custom operating architecture built on top of a no code platform, in this case, Notion, that only expresses what Technosylva needs to do its job. So that foundational piece exists in this company. We've done it for a lot of different departments and workflows, delivery, project management, customer success, product road mapping, and others. And obviously, HR onboarding is the one we're talking about today. Do you have anything you want to add to that before I hop over?
No, but the only thing I would add there is that by making your onboard experience in Notion, in this system where everything else is going to live, it sort of automatically making the employee comfortable with the environment they're going to work in, which I think was a really good connector for us. Because if we're just going to use Notion for onboarding over here and not for anything else, well, that doesn't make any sense, or even vice versa. And so by going through your onboarding in Notion, you've learned how to use the Notion platform. And you're ready to interact with the other teams and how they use it in the company.
Yeah, well said. Okay, so I'm just going to describe a little bit about how we set this up, and then we'll take a look at it, and we can talk about how it's going. So with Notion, this is some advice to any small, medium-sized businesses that are listening. SMB is kind of, in my opinion, like the target market for a company adopting Notion. You want to keep the solutions as simple as possible, and sometimes Notion gets a bad rap for being overly complex. I'll just remind us that like we make it complex, like we add complexity to it, and I'm guilty of it myself. Like it's so fast to build in that you can kind of get caught up in, oh, it would be cool if.
Yeah.
And so I have to kind of remind myself like, no, we need to keep this as simple as possible. So in the spirit of trying to build a global decentralized onboarding solution that solves all those problems that you and I talked about, we have one database that's driving this whole thing, and we call it the master onboarding database. And we rolled this solution out at Technosylva in 3 phases. Phase 1 was just getting all of the HR steps added into the system so that the basic legal and financial and tax and benefits requirements were met in the beginning. Phase 2 was layering on top of that the actual best practices and tools and cultural knowledge and market knowledge contained in different departments. Like, what do you need to know when you join the GIS department versus what do you need to know when you join the sales department? So making it accessible for department leaders to contribute onboarding cards. We call them cards. It's just like a database record in Notion, but it looks like a card to the new employee. What onboarding cards do we want? Does the sales leader want to come into the experience versus, say, the delivery department leader. And then phase 3, which we just recently rolled out, and I'm not sure it's actually been globally announced yet, but we're ready. I think we're ready to do this. Is publishing a Notion form to all employees who are out there on the perimeter fighting the battle every day, becoming aware of mission critical, like small best practices that they think in their mind, like, oh my gosh, the next person that comes behind me to do this job has to know about this one thing that I just tripped over. And so, to me, that's almost the most important part. I mean, obviously, getting paid and getting benefits is foundationally important. But in terms of getting up to speed in your job quickly and with confidence and kind of comprehensive knowledge, you can't replace like what the support team is experiencing on calls with customers that they can then feed back into the onboarding experience. So I'm really excited about the idea that individual contributors across the company can now feed real-time intelligence back into this master onboarding database, which, as I'm going to show you here in a second, feeds out into a personalized onboarding plan for each new person that's customized by their country, their department, their team, etc. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
I don't.
Okay, so let's take a look at how this looks. Let's just start from like the new person's experience. So we have a template for if you onboard in Spain, and we have a template for if you onboard in the United States, just because there's different people you actually talk to. So when they first join, this page gets created, and then it gets shared to them. And this is their comprehensive project where they manage their own onboarding. So we've got some quick links here, like going to get trained on Notion, a people hub where you can get HR information, linking out to Bamboo HR, which is actually interesting. And I want to talk about that briefly. You have Bamboo HR.
Yeah.
Bamboo HR is an HRIS system. I think it's a reasonable question to say, well, if I've got an HRIS system, why do I need a different onboarding solution? Because isn't Bamboo HR taking care of onboarding? And I'll venture my answer to that because I'm talking and I have momentum, but I really want you to answer it. I feel like sometimes onboarding gets narrowly defined by the first phase of what onboarding has to be, which is the payroll and the benefits.
Yeah.
And so you can't do onboarding without doing those things. And the other parts of onboarding are very hard to do and very scattered across the organization. And HR doesn't have the reach and influence to usually control that. And so Bamboo HR and other HRIS systems like it satisfy the first phase very well.
Yeah.
But it's the other aspects of onboarding, like how quickly can we get you up to speed in your job with the knowledge to do your job and the access to the tools you need and things like that we've built in Notion that Bamboo HR probably isn't going to be the knowledge hub for the entire company. You know, that's my take on why it was worth investing in a Notion onboarding solution. Does that sound right to you? What would you change about that answer?
That's absolutely right. Because I would, again, we can argue semantics all day long. There's sort of like, there's the period of time from when an employee signs their offer letter until the employee shows up on day one. And so there's a ton of stuff that has to happen behind the scenes at the company to get ready for that person to be here on day one. And those tasks can be tracked in a bunch of different systems. And then there's also what I call
we chose to do that. Sorry to interrupt you, but we chose to do that in Bamboo HR.
Yeah.
Right. Bamboo HR. Go ahead.
It made sense because we were like, your offer letter had come from there. There were good sort of visualizations and tracking things that needed to happen. And it made sense to not reinvent the wheel over in Notion. because it didn't, putting it in Notion didn't add a ton of value for those types of activities, and we wanted to use it where it was going to add value. Um, and then you're, again, Bamboo, how we use it is just our HRIS system. So we use it for hiring, we use it for payroll. We have integrations to do all of our global employees there as well. So it made sense to handle the stuff that, as I started the conversation, I talked about the very administrative and tactical stuff that has to be done. I call it the table stakes of HR that you have to get right and do well so that we can go do the higher value things. So even if I didn't have Notion, in order to do like a robust onboarding, like we're going to talk about here, from say day one through your onboarding and assimilation in the company, I would have had to go invest in a learning management system or some other type of tool that, again, would be totally disconnected from the work I want those employees to do. So by putting it in Notion, by teaching them how to use this like product function and task tracking, it sets them up to be able to work within their team, because their teams are working in Notion and they understand the automations and what's going through it. So it was about having as few systems as possible and about having as much connected information as possible.
Yeah. To me, that's the big difference between a no-code platform like Notion versus like you mentioned, a learning management system. If you had a learning management system, you would need to populate as an abstraction of your business knowledge, some documents and best practices into that learning management system, but it would be stale very quickly.
Yeah.
And then, so that begs the question, well, why isn't that true in Notion? And the answer is because we are architecting Technosylva's Notion to be woven into the very heartbeat of how people do their jobs. And so in the act of doing a particular job and updating the best practices for that job while you're doing it, the onboarding system that points at that thing in Notion is getting updated information. Whereas if you're using a learning management system, that is an abstraction, and it's a point in time abstraction, and people aren't doing their job in it. And so that's why I think, like, that's what motivates me to invest my energy and time to help companies build in Notion, is because we're removing the latency between the doing of the job and the kind of intellectual property byproduct and the data artifacts of having done that job. And that's a critical thing. I think we've all rolled our eyes at the statement like, oh, we should write an SOP about that. Like, when people start writing SOPs, like, you can't not write an SOP. You want to write an SOP because it's got to be written down somewhere. But SOPs just go to die in a cloud drive, and no one ever looks at them again. And so it was valuable at that moment in time, when the person wrote it, and it certainly reinforced their understanding of how to do that particular job. But the likelihood of the next 10 or 20 employees going and finding that SOP and really understanding it separate from doing their job, it's like, that's why SOPs feel like a waste of time, is because they're not in the mix.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway. Okay, so we're looking here at a comprehensive, personalized onboarding plan for a new person. By the way, I just want to shout out your employee, Shannon Ward, in Spain. She had the kind of inspiration to say, like, hey, let's have this be more than tasks. Because when I originally built this, I was focused on, let's make sure and get all of the onboarding steps for a department and a team and a country visible so they can work on those. But Shannon brought the perspective that, like, we need them to know who they're talking to in their first week, and let's give them pictures of those people and a description of why you would talk to that person. So that was a great addition by Shannon. That's Shannon right there. Anyway, like, good job. So we've got people to meet, and of course this is different in the North American template. And then this set of onboarding tasks here is basically a filtered duplicate of the onboarding master database where onboarding steps are, they get a scope, and the scope is has to be one of these things. Is this item we're doing for every person, no matter what country they live in, or is this item specifically if you live in the United States or Spain or Canada? Or is this item only done by managers, right? Because we're starting to establish a standard of what it means to be a manager. And so there's certain things that only managers need to do or learn during their onboarding. Or is this onboarding step specific to a particular department or a particular team inside of that department? So that is a mutually exclusive choice. You have to pick one of these, and that drives which set of onboarding tasks the employee sees. So if this is a person who is joining in Spain, I would add that. And I just got several new onboarding steps related to that. And then if they are in the engineering department, then I'm going to get some more steps pop in. And if they are on the GIS team, I'm going to get even more steps popping in. So that's how we create a customized experience for each person. And then, as you can see, we've got some groupings, like, are these onboarding steps, like, is it a tool that we're working with? Is it a cultural thing? And I think this is a great, like, this is like the number one onboarding step after our payroll and the basic requirements is, let's learn about Technosylva's history, mission, and future. And in a normal company onboarding situation, someone has to go write that. Like, that's like an essay that's going to get written, and then it's going to get stale, and it's not going to reflect a year later. Whatever someone wrote about that is not going to reflect the latest thing. What I love about what we're doing here is we're treating this onboarding card as a growing checklist of things to do in order for this person to accomplish this. And about a year ago, we had a global on-site meeting here in Austin. And there were some great speeches given by your co-founders, Joaquin and Buck, and then your CEO, Brian, all spoke about the heart behind the mission, how the company started. I mean, Buck was retiring. And so we ended up getting like a whole history of how Joaquin and Buck met and how the company started, in Spain and then migrated to the United States. And those were some amazing stories. And so a brand new employee a year from now, like, the chance of them finding that video is almost zero. But because we recognized how impactful those stories are, that content is referenced and linked out here in a Google Drive. But we are saying to every new employee, you need to watch this video. This is part of the definition of done of learning about Technosylva. And this actually raises a question, because a lot of people, when they see this, are like, wait a sec, so does that mean every single piece of content that I want someone to learn has to be in Notion? And the answer is no. We're using this as a curated index. And here we're pointing to Google Drive. Here we're pointing to a PowerPoint, which is probably also on Google Drive. So it's about curating the experience, not about having to migrate every Google Doc that you've ever written into Notion, right? Like, that's an impossible, it's not an impossible task, but it's not worth it. It's a task that's not worth the switching cost of moving every document.
And I think we talked about, like, should we make everything a wiki? At some point, like, get rid of documents altogether. And we backed off of that really quickly. So.
Yeah, I think Google Docs and Google Drive, and like, they have their place. They're great. They're great for quick collaboration. I mean, I've gotten to the point where I use Notion personally so much that it feels fine to me to, like, spin up a private page and treat it like a Google Doc. But that's not behavior that we need to require of 180 employees in Technosylva that are just getting used to Notion, right? Like, that would be overkill. And so, but centralizing the onboarding in this way, and then linking out to the right content. I mean, like this page is in Notion, but then, as we said, these are not. So that's pretty cool. Okay. So we have onboarding tasks by priority, priority 1, priority 2, priority 3, just do these things first, then do these things last. Here's what we were talking about earlier around for any onboarding step. We can say, is there a person with whom you need to have a required meeting? And so if I'm this new person onboarding, I can see like, oh, I've got second and third priority conversations I need to have with Cara. I need to talk to Umberto. I've got a bunch I need to talk with Jesus about. So you get that full picture of, instead of Jesus feeling like, okay, I guess I got to tell you everything. How many hours is that going to take? And then the employee gets the satisfaction of like completing these tasks, and their manager can come in and say like, hey, we're coming to the end of the first week. How's it going? What do you have? You have any questions about any of this stuff? I mean, obviously the manager and the employee would be talking more than that anyway, but it gives a bird's eye view of how the onboarding is going. So this is what it looks like from the employee's point of view. If I were going to be a skeptical listener to this conversation, I would say, sure, but how do you keep it updated and how do you get people to care? Because this information is in here, but if we don't ever update it or add new stuff in, then it is going to be stale, right? So first of all, the first answer to that question is leadership. Leadership has to make it a priority and talk about it and train people on it and expect it. And this is actually one of the things we expect if you're going to be a manager in this company, is that you contribute in your managerial scope onboarding steps. And so in an ideal world, we would make the contribution of best practices in onboarding part of the performance review of that manager. Something to think about.
Well, it's in there not so specifically. It's in there as an option. So we say that in order to be eligible to be promoted to a manager, that you have to contribute to company building activities. That could be through onboarding. It could be through recruiting. It could be through leading training pills. So we do already factor these types of things in.
Yeah. So this is a manager's restricted team space. This is a dashboard that allows managers to add onboarding cards for the department or team. Just a really simple setup. You click this to add an onboarding card, and this is where the manager says like, okay, well, this is for my department, which is science and innovation, and I want them to do this as a first priority, and this is going to be a best practice they need to know about, and they need to talk with this person. And in order to do this thing, what would it look like for them to really go through it? And this is actually one of the most important things here, because we really do need to create an experience. It's like, when you've worked here for a long time, you start to innately understand the dependencies of our very complex knowledge. Like you mentioned that Technosylva is founded on some of the best fire science in the world. Mm-hmm. Well, in order to operate in this environment, you actually have to start to understand the GIS models versus the client asset files versus the, and on, right? And so we have an opportunity when a new person comes in, for whatever step we're giving them, to think through like, okay, if I didn't know any of this stuff and I now want them to do this onboarding step, let me actually build an experience for them that's incremental, that teaches them what they need to know. And that's just super valuable, because without something like this, what's going to happen is it's like, hey, go look at that spreadsheet. It's like, okay, well, I'm looking at the spreadsheet. What matters about this spreadsheet?
And I think it's the questions that we've been answering for employees. And, the best piece of feedback we get on this tool is, if I had asked a question a year and a half ago, how long does it take a new hire to get up and be good and contributing to their job? And if I had looked at anybody on the engineering team, they would have been like a year or more, because that's how long it's going to take me to like have enough contact with this employee to teach them everything they could possibly need to know. And so we've solved that problem a couple ways. One, we've sort of helped understand, like, at what point in your journey here do you need to have certain information, and then by spreading it out and documenting it, or pointing to other documentation and making it like incremental, we've been able to bring people up to speed faster. Where now, if I talk to one of my engineering leaders, they would say 3 months, or less in some cases, that I can get this person doing these right tasks, and I can get these persons thinking strategically about what needs to be done, from a year to 3 months, which
That
for the at the clip that we're um, expanding, and the fact that we hired 39 people in engineering and science last year, and they all went through this rather than having to spend hours with Jesus or Umberto,
yeah.
it's made a big difference.
Yeah, 6 months accelerated productivity across 39 engineers is a material, quantifiable
Mhm.
improvement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond the engineering team too. I think certainly in like setting up delivery and customer success, just like if you drop into really any department, but into customer success or into product, you've got to like eat an elephant pretty quickly in order to understand sort of the context of what we're looking at. And we've been able to build databases in here that talk about how every client uses what tool, and when they had their last update, and so you can go to a page and you can see it all, and it's getting constantly updated because we work in it. And so a new hire can just go and click on that, and they suddenly have a real wealth of information that they might have gotten to, maybe, if they got
Mm-hmm.
invited to the right meeting,
Mm-hmm.
or they ran into somebody in the office. But we're a fully dispersed organization, and we will continue to be that, with a global footprint. And so, like, everybody for a long time in HR talked about, well, how do we recreate the water cooler in the fully remote world? And the answer is you can't. You have to build a new system,
Mm-hmm.
because there's no water cooler out here for us to run into. Like, you have to create a new knowledge base where that stuff happens. And I think Notion has been a great tool for us in being able to do that.
So I have a couple comments I want to make on that. Number one, I don't know if you know this or not, but with David Schoenberg, I'm working on building a Notion Champions program,
Mm-hmm.
which is going to essentially allow uh, volunteer employees who want to do this to train into and essentially get like certified as like, okay, you're a Technosylva Notion champion. And it's an interesting mix of, there's certain things that they need to know that they can do. Like but there is a level after which we don't want people building new databases and tinkering with databases, right? So there's a fine line between, to get a Notion champion trained up correctly isn't to teach them everything about Notion. Notion is too powerful for that. I mean, I've spent 5 years in the trenches building complex solutions, and I'm still learning every day. And
Mm-hmm.
so we're going to train the Technosylva Notion champions to do safe things that are value producing. And I can give you one really cool example. And by the way, there are some just amazing people, uh, Shannon, Annika, Celeste,
Mm-hmm.
who are stepping up and learning this and becoming Notion champions before we even set up the program. But here's like a great example. So we have I'm not going to show the customer's database because I don't want to reveal any private data,
Yeah.
Um, but we have a customer's database, and we track everything about the customer in here post HubSpot, right? So the customer starts in HubSpot. So we're really amassing a tremendous amount of information about Technosylva customers, what products they have, what conferences we've done with them, what um, deliveries we did, everything you can imagine. Well, one of those things is a link to the testimonials they've given us. And what the customer success team has realized is like, hey, we've got this list of customers that we can sort by customer health, and we have a bunch of champions. And there's like there's like champion, and then like promoter, and then neutral or on track, right? Well, those positive health ratings can be correlated against, do we have a testimonial for them? And so now the customer success team has a white space dashboard called champions without a testimonial.
Yeah.
So we need to go get testimonials for these people. It's a great way to organize and motivate the customer success team to go get those testimonials. And Annika thought of that. And Annika was able to build that because we're not rebuilding a database. We're just taking business intelligence that makes sense to the customer success team, and she's building a linked filtered view off of that and built that dashboard. And I gave her a little help, and this is part of her training. But that's just such a great example of where a Notion champion wants to be contributing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, that's great.
And the last thing that it made me think of is there are challenges with this kind of solution because it's comprehensive across the entire company.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the challenges is that people have preferences for tools and against tools. It doesn't matter what tool it is. If you take a tool and show it to 10 people, 5 people will say, I love it. And 5 people will say, I hate it every time. Right. And one of the interesting things about Notion, as I've been wrestling with it inside of companies for 5 years now, is like, if you look at what Shannon and I are doing in delivery, Annika and I are doing customer success, Celeste and I are doing in marketing, it has very little to do with Notion itself, but we are using Notion as a forcing function to essentially interview ourselves into alignment for how that team wants to work.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, we've had to make so many policy decisions between, like, Shannon and I will be working on something and need to escalate to Jeff, who's the VP of that department, to say, we can't actually configure Notion until we make a leadership decision on whether, when we say that a forecasted go live date is going to happen, what do we want finance to know about that? And so my encouragement to us, to you and me, and any SMB that wants to do this is, don't think about Notion as like, okay, it's a tool and I like it or I don't like it. And I tried to use it and I used a template and it didn't make sense. Like, that's not what Notion's value proposition is, in my opinion. To me, what its value proposition is it creates a blank space that forces accountability of alignment inside a team and across teams. And that's time consuming. Like, I refer to it as like interdepartmental marriage therapy. When you say this, she hears that. Can we get agreement on what we mean when we use this language, Yeah. But the fruit of that, like the fruit of that deep discovery and alignment, becomes customized software that like perfectly expresses your mission, your language, and your operating reality, So it's hard because it is a tool and people react to it like a tool. But anyway, yeah. I was talking to Kate yesterday in implementation, and she was like, yeah, I'm starting to realize that I have a lot of spreadsheets that I'm tracking implementation team tasks in, and I can't see a big picture. And so I had kind of written off using Notion because that's like for other departments. But now I'm like, oh, everything's connected to it. So let's go get my stuff in there,
Yeah.
But it just takes time for different teams to kind of get that realization of, it's an expression of how you want to work, not a tool preference.
Yeah. And I think that's, really important, for anybody thinking about using Notion or any technology, they all come blank in some ways, like you have to like do the work to make the decisions to drive the behaviors that you want. And Notion has been an excellent organizing principle for us in like, again, forcing those decisions, driving buy-in at the top level of the organization, and then incrementally, building these systems. And we started this conversation saying, oh, we talked about this the first time 2 years ago. Well, we had an onboarding V1 out, a month later, really. Like, we had the first vision of that. So like, we didn't wait 2 years to like launch this perfect thing. We put a V1 out there, and then we played with it. We tried to break it, and we're like, oh, wouldn't it be great? And we had somebody, a new hire, go through it, and like, oh, well, did you think about doing it this way? And so it drives this like incremental, really collaborative environment, which we want to. That's what we want to have here. We want to solve problems. So
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably a good place to stop.
okay.
Thank you for your partnership and helping making that real. And we've still got more good problems to solve. So let's go do it.
We do for sure.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.